Sequels. I've spoke about a lot of them over the past year, but none of them are as unique as this game I'm talking about today. That is of course Saints Row 4, a game that started life as a DLC and slowly turned into one of the most ambitious games in the series. But did the changes it brought in help the series stay at the top of its game? Or was this now legendary franchise about to run its course? So yeah, today I'm looking at Saints Row 4, and as you can probably tell by the background, the setup is a bit different this time around. It's in one of my unfinished bedrooms at the house. I did make an update video a few weeks ago if you want to go and watch that, where I just explain that we're having the house basically renovated upstairs, and my whole setup, so that corner there where that weird mirror thing is, that's where my old setup used to be. We had a wall ripped out, put in, all that good stuff, and yeah, so it took a lot longer than I expected, and I've been away for longer than I thought I would be. So what I've done is set up this improvised setup in one of the spare rooms, which is just completely empty, half painted rooms, and yeah, the angle's a bit weird. This is the best angle I can get on the camera. I might just put some like Saints Row 4 gameplay in this corner, might work. But yeah, other than that, I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want to know what's going on, check the update video. I'll have a link down below. And yeah, let's get into Saints Row 4. Saints Row 4 probably has the most interesting story behind its development than any other game in the series. You see, whilst the franchise itself was doing well, the publisher THQ behind the games and its development team Voltion wasn't. Even though THQ had some big IPs in its library, poor decision making and whatever the fuck this was supposed to be meant that the publisher was in big trouble. This was all happening around the time of Saints Row the 3rd's release. Even though the game was doing well, it wouldn't be enough to save the publisher. But over at Voltion, it was business as usual. In 2012 they would release DLC packs and a complete edition of the game. It was clear that with the DLC packs the team were going more and more over the top, especially the final one, Trouble with Clones, which would see the player acquire superpowers, which is just crazy and way too out there for a Saints Row game. Then on April 1st 2012, Voltion announced a standalone expansion for Saints Row the 3rd called Enter the Dominatrix. It was of course an April Fool's joke, or so we thought. A few days after the announcement, Voltion announced that it was in fact real and that the DLC would come out in the summer of 2012, and it never did. You see, at the time, thanks to THQ's problems, they were bringing in new people to try and steady the ship. This meant bringing in co-founder of Naughty Dog, Jason Rubin, who saw the work the team over at Voltion were putting into the standalone DLC and asked them what they could achieve given more time. Which meant that the standalone DLC, which started as an April Fool's joke, would now be the 4th game in the series. And even though it started life as a joke, it still wouldn't be the biggest joke in the series history.
Get the fuck away from my friends.
Oh, friend! Oh, new friend! Oh, friend! Please be my friend! Oh, friend!
But by the end of 2012, THQ would officially file for bankruptcy, which meant that Voltion and the Saints Row series would be sold to a new publisher, this being Deep Silver, who were most known for back then the Dead Island series. Thankfully, work didn't stop on the next game in the series, and in August of 2013 we would see the release of Saints Row 4. But for the first time since 2008, Saints Row would release in the same window as its old rival, that of course being GTA 5.
Why did I move here? I guess it was the weather.
But I'm not going to compare the two, because at this point it's like comparing Rocket League to FIFA. They were just two completely different games. But on the 19th of August 2013, Saints Row 4 would release on Xbox 360, PS3 and PC. So seeing as it's been quite a while since my last Saints Row video, I think it's time to recap on the story so far and see how the older games compared to Saints Row 4. Let's start at the beginning, where the player is caught up in a shootout between the 3 main gangs in Stillwater, but is saved by Julius, leader of the Saints, and given a chance to join up with them and help take out the other rival gangs. After doing all that, the player gets involved with politicians of the city and ends up being blown up on a boat and put into a coma. A pretty down to earth, realistic, gritty story. In Saints Row 2, the player wakes up from that coma after a few years to discover the Saints have disbanded and 3 new gangs have took their place. The player then breaks out of prison and with the help of Johnny Gat reforms the Saints, with some new recruits to take out not only the gangs of Stillwater, but also the Ultor Corporation to take complete control of the city. Again, a pretty down-to-earth, realistic, gritty story. Then in the third, the Saints have complete control of Stillwater and have become a household name. After a bank heist goes wrong, they're captured by a group known as the Syndicate, who want a piece of what the Saints have, but ultimately the gang, minus Johnny Gat, go to the city of Stillport and take down the Syndicate and a private army known as Stag to take control of the new city. Again, pretty down to earth, realistic story. It does get a bit crazy sometimes, but still quite a believable leap from the previous two. So what's the story of Saints Row 4? Well, the game starts with the Saints helping the government take down terrorists who are targeting the US with a nuke. After the mission is a success, the player then, you ready for this, becomes the President of the United States. But that isn't even the craziest thing that happens. After a bit of time in the Oval Office, the White House is then attacked by aliens. Yep, aliens who abduct most of the Saints and of course the player. Then they're put into simulations, but after Kinsey manages to break the player out, they are then placed into their very own virtual Stillport to help the rest of the Saints escape and take down Zinyak, the main antagonist of the game. Oh, and you get superpowers as well. I forgot to mention that. It was a bit different, wasn't it? I still don't know how we went from this to this, but the funny thing is that Saints Row 4, with all its aliens, superpowers and virtual worlds, in my opinion has a way more compelling story than its predecessor. You see, like I said in my Saints Row the 3rd video, I think the reason it didn't really land with its story was because it was too far removed from what we got in Saints Row 2, to go from a gritty and oftentimes dark story to this goofy, never taking itself too seriously mess in the 3rd. It was just too much of a drastic change to enjoy. But because the premise of Saints Row 4 is so bizarre and out there, you've kind of just expect it to get a bit goofy.
Oh, baby! You got what I need. Did the opera channel come in? And you say he's just a friend. Damn it! And you say he's just a friend. Fuck this guy. You got what I need. And you say he's just a friend. And you say he's just a friend. Hell no!
Zinyak fucked with Biz Marquee.
Man, I can't wait to kill that bitch!
But there's still a lot of times where the story gets a bit serious and dark, mostly in the simulations for each member of the Saints. You see, the reason for the simulations is to completely break the person who's inside it, so they're put into a world of their darkest fears. Some of these are still quite funny, like Pierce being hunted down by cans of Saints energy drink, and the players being a world where obeying the rules and driving safely are king. But then some get dark, like Shondy's being on the plane where Johnny died, having to relive not being able to save him over and over again, and seeing herself become the old version of her where she was useless and more of a liability in the second game.
Get out. What's her problem? My problem? My problem is that I used to be you.
This isn't a born-again thing, is it?
No, she's future you.
Makes sense. So what happens to me?
What do you mean?
Look, Shondy, let's get out of...
No. I want to hear what I have to say to myself. What did you mean, what happens to me?
Well, evidently I become a total frigid bitch, so I just wanted to know what's up.
Oh, you mean I stopped sitting around smoking drugs from a broken light bulb all day?
Guys, maybe we should...
Yeah, you're lame now. You used to have fun.
I used to be useless.
What?
The most memorable thing you ever did was get captured by your smoked out ex.
That's not true.
I'm sorry, and fucking half of Stillwater. Go team.
I always thought you were just really friendly and hated pants.
Someone gets it.
I hate me. Let's get out of here.
It gets pretty deep in the backgrounds of the members of the Saints, and of course the simulation for Johnny being based around trying to save Aisha, but always getting there a few seconds too late. The game does a lot of this sort of character development throughout the game, especially with the rescue missions I just mentioned, and also the loyalty missions to unlock the super homies, which are just new variations of existing Saints with powers. Even the side activity missions you get have a lot of dialogue and backstory for all the Saints speaking to the player, and it's a great way to actually motivate the player to want to help to save them and take out Zinyak. Even if the premise is a bit out there, the actual story from beginning to end is pretty compelling, and it's 10 times better than what the previous game did. And 1,000 times better than what we would get in the future.
Oh, friend. Please be my friend. Oh, friend.
Now, when talking about the gameplay, there's only one major difference between this game and the previous one. That is, of course, the powers. Seeing as it started life as an expansion, the game is essentially Saints Row the Third with some mods. That's not to say they're a bad addition, and actually add a lot to the game. I'm not going to talk about each power individually, as there's a lot of them, but I will talk about how they work in the game. First of all is the movement. You can now super sprint, super jump, glide and run up walls to get across the map, which means vehicles are now pretty much obsolete, which is a shame, but honestly, even getting the fastest car in the game can feel like you're slowing yourself down. Thankfully, the radio stations and music can now be played on foot, so you're not running through the depressing city of Steelport in complete silence. The movement reminds me a lot of prototype games and is actually really fun to use, especially with your own custom playlist playing in the background. Just a heads up, if you are playing this for the first time, do Keith David's side quest to unlock unlimited sprinting, because that stamina bar runs out surprisingly fast. Obviously the powers aren't just tied to movement, there's also a wide range of new attacks. These range from shooting fireballs or ice blasts, telekinesis and stomping. You unlock these throughout the game and they all have their uses and are all pretty fun to use. I mostly stuck to the blast power though, just to take out waves of enemies, especially the ice variant, as it can just drop the enemy VTOLs and hover bikes straight out of the air, but they all have their uses, especially taking out the new enemy types. You obviously have your typical bog standard grunt enemies just running around shooting you, but there are also variants who also have similar powers. It gives a bit more balance to the gameplay, as you never feel overpowered and will constantly have to keep moving and using your powers in different ways. Thankfully, switching between them is quite easy, as you can use the D-pad in the game to switch or go into the weapon wheel, which now pauses the game to give you a bit more time to figure out what you're going to do next. Honestly, the powers are really fun to play around with, and all of them can be fully upgraded, which I'll talk about a bit later. And even though this isn't really a Saints Row game anymore, and feels a bit more like Crackdown, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a blast to play through. Also, running through a group of enemies while super sprinting and hitting them with the new super finishers is probably the most fun I've ever had in a game. Another small change from the last game is the health system, which is by far the worst version of it in the series history. In the first two games, you just regained health by eating food items you stored, which was changed to a simplified regen system in the third game, and now it's been changed again to relying on health pickups from enemies and pedestrians, which honestly is fine 80% of the time, but that 20% when you're just hiding in a corner with more stronger enemies attacking you and no NPCs in sight is really frustrating, and it does still regen over time, but it honestly feels like it takes a couple of minutes this time around, and you're better off just risking it and twatting a few NPCs to get a bit of health back, which still feels a bit tedious and just takes you out of the game sometimes. There's not really much difference in terms of weapons and vehicle gameplay, it all feels quite the same as the last game. So if you haven't already, check out my video on Saints Row the Third, or even the playlist on the previous 3 games. I'll leave a link in the description for those of you who are new to the channel. You know I had to sneak a cheeky plug in there somewhere, but like I said at the start of this segment, the game just feels like Saints Row the Third with mods. The driving and shooting feels exactly the same, but the powers and traversal of the map add just enough to make it feel like a totally new and fresh experience. It's time to talk about all the things you'll be doing in the virtual Steelport, with the activities, missions and all the things in between. As always, I'll start with the activities. This is probably the biggest change in the different activities in the series, as a lot of the old ones have been taken out. Classics like escort and trafficking have been completely removed and been replaced with ones that use the powers a bit more, like the Professor Genki activity this time around sees you use telekinesis to chuck certain objects around, and the Rift variants using the super sprint and jump mechanics, but honestly they're all quite forgetful. They all just seem to copy and paste with subtle differences. I mean, there's 4 different variations of Mayhem, just using a different vehicle each time. I honestly don't think I've ever completed one of these by just walking up to it on the map, and I've only ever done them through side quests. We also see the return of some of the diversions from Saints Row the Third. You know the usual, go here, take out this group of enemies, and go here and destroy this. And then there's also the tower climbing diversion, which reminds me of that getting over it game, because if you fall, you've got to start right from the bottom, and that doesn't help considering they're so fucking boring to do. But to make all of these activities and diversions feel a bit more attached to the main story, most of them are used in the side quest. These see you going through the simulation for each individual saint, doing random activities and diversions, whilst they talk about different topics to the player, to try and tie it all together. Honestly, this is the only reason to do any of these, because you get some decent rewards for doing so, like new weapons and upgrades, like I mentioned before with the unlimited sprint. And I don't know, there's just something about slowly checking off the massive list of objectives that get thrown at you that's really satisfying. But how about the missions? Well, I'm still trying to figure out if overall I enjoyed most of them, because while some are super fun and unique, especially the rescue missions for characters like Ben King, Pierce and Johnny Gat, the latter of which sees you play a parody of Streets of Rage, but there are also a ton of filler missions. In these you'll be doing very similar objectives to what you do in the activities and diversions, like taking out enemy strongholds, which after playing this happens a lot. You spend most of your time just going to places that look like this.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
It's just really forgetful, and that's why the missions that take place in other simulations are so much better, because at least they have some variations. There's not a lot of missions either, with only 21 of them being completed to finish the game, but there are also 7 loyalty missions to unlock each gang member's super variant, which also need to be completed to get the good ending, and also the side quests I mentioned before. So even though the main quest seems quite short, you still have hours of side missions and activities to go through. Even if some of them are quite forgetful, there's still some hidden gems hidden in there. Oh, and one more thing. Fuck these fucking mech missions. They are so fucking bad, and the worst thing I've ever had to do in a Saints Row game. Now, because this game is basically Saints Row the 3.5, or would it be Saints Row the 3.5? Or a 5th? Or a 4th? Anyway, the character customization is basically the same, with some minor differences. You can change the pitch of the voice, and also Nolan North is now one of the options.
And that is why it is my pleasure to announce pole dancing as our new national sport.
He's not male option 4, he's just called Nolan North. I bet Troy Baker was fuming with that.
Fuck you!
Honestly, the differences in terms of the actual character creator are so minor, there's really no point looking at it in depth. There's a few new clothing options, but you know me by this point, I am probably the most boring person when it comes to designing a character in a Saints Row game. But obviously in Saints Row 4, the more out there costumes are as crazy as ever, and due to the setting and tone of the game, seem a bit more justified to walk around in a crazy costume this time around. One more thing I wanted to add was the upgrade system for the powers. It's similar to the system we had in the 3rd, which also makes a return here, with you levelling up to unlock new upgrades for the powers, but instead of using cash that you use to buy other upgrades, you'll have to find clusters found all around the city, mostly on rooftops. I'm not gonna lie, I did find this system quite tedious, and honestly rarely went out my way to try and upgrade any of the powers. But I would spend most of my time travelling from objective to objective, picking a few up along the way to upgrade things over time. But my advice would be to focus on upgrading the powers early on, as they become incredibly useful later on in the game, and having the base stats on most of them will leave you with a bit of a disadvantage. Cars can still be customised, but having a rim jobs in this game seems about as useful as setting up a CEX store in the middle of an Amish community. You'll never need to drive in the game after like the hour mark, but it's still great to have the option to customise the vehicles. And just like the character customisation, it is very similar to the 3rd, with a few new bits and bobs sprinkled on top. The car variety this time around is very similar to the previous game, with a few alien type vehicles being added, and also as I'm writing the script I forgot to check the garage to see what vehicles were added in the DLC packs, and there are some fun vehicles in here that you would go the whole game without even noticing, which is a shame, except for this one. Whoever designed this needs to be put on a register. And last but not least are the weapons, which have been completely overhauled from the last game. For starters, they can now be upgraded bit by bit, rather than the guns having 3 levels of upgrading like the previous one. You now upgrade things like clip size, fire rate, damage, and then most weapons have a special upgrade, which usually costs around 20,000 cash to apply. I underestimated how much I'd actually need decent weapons throughout the game, as I thought the superpowers would be enough, but as you go through the game and see more and more enemy types and bigger waves, you'll soon realise that you need a lot of firepower. Another thing that has been changed is how the look of the weapons can be customised. Previously the weapons would only change cosmetically once upgraded, but here most weapons have about half a dozen skins you can apply to each of them. Obviously some of them are wacky, others are references to classic movies, and some of them just make the gun look a bit cooler. This is a great way to personalise your massive inventory of weapons, and of course there are some wacky weapons added as well, like the Rectifier, which, if you want to know more about this thing, just Google Saints Row 4 Australia. I'm sure you'll find out all about it. There is also the likes of the Inflato Ray, which, well, inflates enemies till they explode, and my personal favourite, the Black Hole Gun, which does exactly what you'd expect it to do. But I can't talk about Saints Row 4 weapons without talking about its most famous and seriously outdated weapon. The dubstep gun, which shoots out dubstep music and forces whoever is in front of it to start dancing until it eventually kills them. remember seeing this for the first time when I was younger and thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and of course it just seems a bit cringy now, but still lots of fun to play around with. On top of that, there are of course a bunch of alien weapons to play around with, which are also a lot of fun. I mean, it's a real shame that things like character customization and vehicle modifications haven't really changed all that much, but I think the amount of weapons and powers to upgrade and play around with definitely makes up for that, with hours of fun to be had. I feel like I've been pretty positive about the game so far, but I think it's time for me to talk about the one thing that really fucking annoys me about this game, and that's its world and map. In my Saints Row the 3rd video I said this: Steelport is so fucking boring. All the streets look the same, there isn't any unique locales to explore, it all just has this grey, dull look, and I really don't know how they managed to, but they've made Steelport even more drab and depressing. First of all, there's no day and night cycle, you are just trapped in this constant darkness, which in the previous game's defence did look a lot better at night, but that was because of the neon lights in the skyline and the eye-catching billboards, which have all been changed to this depressing shade of red and Zignac's face everywhere. It's just not a fun place to be, and even though the developers added a few more secret areas to explore, it's still not enough to save Steelport from being the worst map in the mainline series history, and to somehow make it worse. I'm not even mad, that's actually quite impressive. Honestly, it just dampens the whole experience. I know they probably didn't have time to create a whole new map, but they could have at least gave it a bit more colour and light. There are parts in certain simulations where the game has a bright look to it, and it's so refreshing to see, but sadly the place where you spend 90% of the game isn't like that at all, and it isn't until you complete the story that you actually get the option to change the time of day, among other filters. Obviously I always talk about the radio stations and music, and I'm happy to say Saints Row 4 has the second best soundtrack out of the whole series. It's good, but not Saints Row 2 good. I mostly listen to rap and hip hop, so it's good to see some great songs in here, from at the time which were some great up and coming artists like A$AP Rocky, Kendrick Lamar and Macklemore, also Warning Shot from Machine Gun Kelly, you know, before he started dressing like a Saints Row character. We also see the return of 420 Radio, which I'm a big fan of, and of course The Mix, a radio station dedicated to classics from the 80s and 90s, like Montel Jordan's This Is How We Do It, Biz Marquis's Just a Friend, sung to by Blur, also much more from artists like Cypress Hill and Outkast. Jesus, I'm starting to sound like one of those ads for a country music compilation. All I'm trying to say is that the soundtrack is an absolute banger, and it's made all the more enjoyable thanks to being able to listen to your own custom playlist while running around the streets at 90 miles an hour and absolutely decimating all the enemies in your way, whilst listening to The Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy. And to be honest, I don't think anything sums up Saints Row 4 more perfectly than that. It's been over 10 years since the game released, and after all that time I still can't decide whether I love it or hate it. On one hand, it's a super fun game with a great story and tons of powers and weapons to play around with, but at the same time it just wasn't Saints Row anymore. Gone were the days of taking over a city by completely tearing down other criminal empires and watching the city slowly turn purple over time, and in come the superpowers, spaceships and mechs. I don't know, I'm still unsure about it. It took everything I loved from the first two games away, but in its place was still a super fun and enjoyable experience. I guess you could say Saints Row 4 is a game I hate to love. So of course I have to put Saints Row 4 in the tier list, and I'm going to put it in A tier. I love it, it's a good game, I've really enjoyed going back to it, but it's just not a Saints Row game, and that's what lets it down ultimately. If this was called something else, it'd still be a lot of fun, and I'd still enjoy it because it's a lot of fun, the story's great, and it obviously doesn't take itself too seriously, but sometimes it does, and it works really well, and the powers are great, the upgrade system, the new way to customise guns is brilliant. Obviously with the character customisations a bit lacking in new sort of new stuff, and of course the car customization is just there, it doesn't need to be, but it is. But yeah, that is it for Saints Row 4. I've really enjoyed going back. Obviously this video took a bit longer than normal, as you can tell by the state of this room, but yeah, this will probably change every couple of weeks. The setup will just be different. I'll be in a different room, there'll be a different colour in the background, a different camera angle, which I need to get used to and stop looking at the computer screen like I am now. But yeah, thank you for being so patient with these videos. I know I've been taking a bit longer recently, but obviously a lot of stuff is going on in the background which I can't help, it needs to be done. So that's pulling me away from the YouTube channel a bit, but I am trying to get back to it. Look, I am here in this fucking half painted room trying to make these videos, but yeah, I hope you still enjoyed it anyway. And yeah, the Get Out of Hell video will be out very soon. I have been a bit delayed with this video, to be honest. Other reasons to do with the house, I haven't been able to get it out when I wanted it to get out, so it's been delayed a bit. But yeah, the Get Out of Hell video, I will be working on that next. There are a few complications with that. I'm not going to get into all of that, but it's going to be awkward to try and record footage for that. But I can't think of anything else to say. I have a TikTok account now where I post clips from this channel. So if you are from that TikTok and you've seen me on there, welcome to the channel. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you are new to the channel in general, I do lots of videos like this. Over the last year, I've done all the Tekkens, I've done a bit of Half-Life 1 and 2, and of course Saints Row, and more will be coming up very, very soon. But yeah, that is it. I've got nothing else to say really, but thank you for watching. Thank you so much again for your patience, and as always, I'll see you when I see you.